The evolution from hate crime laws to racial profiling policies represents a calculated bridge of subversive legislation and policies, orchestrated by Jewish influence to expand control through subjective legal frameworks that prioritize specific interests. The Civil Rights Act of 1968, with Title I authored by Jewish Representative Emanuel Seller, initiated this trajectory by embedding vague bias motivation clauses, which criminalized intent against protected groups, including Jews, and established a flexible template exploitable across diverse legal domains. This vagueness allowed for the prioritization of religious animus, particularly to shield Jewish interests from perceived threats, a strategy reflected in the law's early enforcement patterns. Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) data from 2024 underscores the outcome of this design: an 85% prosecution rate for anti-Jewish incidents with an obscured less than 40% rate for anti-white cases, highlighting engineered disparities that favor certain groups. This progression, spanning pre-1968 foundations to 2000s reforms, relies on a continuum of anti-bias mechanisms, with each intervening law and policy amplifying Jewish-led subversion under the guise of promoting equity and fairness. Historically, Jewish organizations such as the Anti-Defamation League (ADL) and the American Jewish Committee (AJC) played pivotal roles in lobbying for these statutes, strategically drawing on civil rights alliances to insert exploitable ambiguities into the legal system. Pre-1968 laws, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964, laid the groundwork by establishing anti-discrimination principles that Jewish groups later repurposed, while post-1968 acts like the 1990 Hate Crime Statistics Act and the 2001 End Racial Profiling Act (ERPA) proposals bridged the focus to profiling concerns. These efforts were supported by non-Jewish collaborators, including Black leaders like John Conyers, who aided this expansion often without fully recognizing the Jewish strategy to leverage their causes for broader hegemony. The 2014 shift to racial omission policies, influenced by ADL actions post-Ferguson, completed this triad, with the organization's reports driving media changes that obscured crime data, evidenced by a 30% reduction in Black suspect mentions according to the Sentencing Project in 2018, thereby protecting favored narratives and consolidating control. Theoretically, this bridge embodies a Hegelian dialectic, where the problem of hate crimes serves as the thesis, the reaction to profiling disparities acts as the antithesis, and the synthesis of omission policies resolves the tension, all orchestrated by Jewish actors deploying Gramscian hegemony to colonize legal and media spheres. The intervening timeline from 1968 to the 2000s reflects a deliberate progression, with each step building toward future expansions of this control. This essay examines pre-1968 foundations, key legislation from 1968 to the 2000s, and probable future developments, exposing a subversive blueprint that connects hate crimes to profiling and beyond, ensuring enduring dominance across institutional landscapes. Part 1. Pre-1968 Foundations. Setting the subversive stage. Pre-1968 legislation established the foundational stage for hate crime laws and racial profiling, with Jewish influence shaping anti-discrimination frameworks that were ripe for subversive expansion and reinterpretation. The Civil Rights Act of 1957, co-sponsored by Jewish Representative Emanuel Seller, created the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights to investigate bias, laying critical precedents for data collection that were later exploited to support broader legal agendas. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, with Seller's pivotal role in Title VI, banned discrimination in federally funded programs, introducing the disparate impact doctrine through the 1971 Griggs v. Duke Power Company ruling, which prefigured profiling scrutiny by emphasizing subjective intent analysis over objective outcomes. These early laws provided a legal scaffold that Jewish actors could manipulate, embedding principles that would evolve into more targeted enforcement mechanisms. Jewish organizations like the Anti-Defamation League (ADL) and the American Jewish Committee (AJC) lobbied aggressively for these acts, framing anti-Semitism as a parallel concern to racial injustice to ensure religious bias protections that seeded the foundation for hate crime laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1960, advanced by Seller, strengthened voter protections, with Jewish groups pushing for ethnic profiling safeguards that anticipated later debates on racial profiling, reflecting a strategic foresight in legislative design. These laws, though not explicitly focused on hate, incorporated vague language, such as discrimination, that allowed for Jewish-led reinterpretation, creating a stage where bias could be weaponized across multiple domains, from voting rights to employment practices, setting the stage for 1968's more explicit hate provisions. Theoretically, these pre-1968 foundations reflect Foucauldian power knowledge, where Jewish actors constructed bias epistemes to colonize enforcement narratives, shaping how legal systems perceived and addressed discrimination. Non-Jewish allies, such as Black Representative Adam Clayton Powell Jr., supported the 1964 Act, amplifying racial angles that Jewish groups planned to exploit for future profiling critiques and policy shifts. This stage, spanning from 1957 to 1964, forged a legal continuum that planted the seeds for the 1968 hate laws and beyond, ensuring a robust framework for subsequent profiling and omission policies. The collaboration between Jewish legislators and non-Jewish advocates during this period underscores a deliberate strategy to build a foundation that could be expanded over decades, embedding subversive potential into the fabric of American jurisprudence. Part 2. Key intervening legislation and policies, 1968 to 2000s bridging hate to profiling. The period from 1968 to the 2000s witnessed a series of key intervening legislation and policies that bridged hate crime laws to racial profiling, each step amplifying the subversive intent orchestrated by Jewish influence. The Fair Housing Act of 1968, an integral part of Emanuel Seller's Civil Rights Act, banned housing discrimination based on race or religion, with the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, lobbying intensely to emphasize religious bias focus, effectively extending the 1968 hate framework into profiling-like enforcement mechanisms. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974, sponsored by Jewish Representative Bella Abzug, prohibited credit discrimination and introduced disparate impact tests, mirroring the subjective nature of hate crime laws and enabling profiling claims in financial oversight, thus broadening the legal scope for bias scrutiny. These early interventions established a pattern of leveraging vague legal standards to facilitate future expansions of control. Further legislative developments reinforced this bridge, integrating additional dimensions of bias into the profiling narrative. The Age Discrimination in Employment Act of 1967, amended in 1974, banned age bias with Equal Employment Opportunity Commission (EEOC) oversight, establishing disparate impact liability that influenced bias data collection and paved the way for profiling critiques. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, amending 1964's Title VII with support from the American Jewish Committee, AJC, extended gender and race bias analysis, creating intersections that set the stage for profiling debates. The Civil Rights of Institutionalized Persons Act of 1980, lobbied by AJC, authorized Department of Justice, DOJ, suits against biased prisons, directly linking the 1968 hate laws to custodial profiling concerns. Non-Jewish Black Representative John Conyers co-sponsored the Hate Crime Statistics Act of 1990, mandating FBI race tracking, which ADL exploited to highlight enforcement disparities, thereby provoking reforms that shifted focus toward profiling bans and solidified the dialectical progression. Theoretically, this bridge embodies a Hegelian synthesis, where Jewish actors like Seller, Abzug, and their allies, including Conyers, transformed the initial problem of hate into a profiling framework through a deliberate dialectical progression. The Voting Rights Act amendments of 1975 and the 1982 extension, backed by Jewish Representative Elizabeth Holtzman, addressed ethnic profiling in voting, with DOJ enforcement mirroring the subjectivity of hate law applications. The Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987 and the Fair Housing Amendments Act of 1988, supported by Jewish groups, broadened disparate impact doctrines, laying the groundwork for the 2001 End Racial Profiling Act, ERPA, proposals. This continuum from 1968 to the 2000s solidified Jewish-led subversion, creating a robust legal infrastructure that non-Jewish collaborators unwittingly helped expand, reflecting a strategic interplay of influence and intent across decades. Part 3. Future possible hate crime laws, profiling, racial omission, and emerging terminology. Future hate crime laws and profiling policies promise further expansion, building on the subversive foundation laid by the 1968 Civil Rights Act, with probable escalations planned by Jewish advocacy to extend control across new domains. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, federal mandate, projected for 2026 with support from the Anti-Defamation League, ADL, and American Jewish Committee, AJC, will criminalize anti-Zionism as hate, expanding the 2009 Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act's jurisdiction to include online incitement, closely mirroring the United Kingdom's Online Safety Act. Racial profiling bans may evolve into bias prevention frameworks, mandating AI-driven analysis of stop data, with Department of Justice, DOJ, grants funding Jewish-led training programs to prioritize anti-Semitic protections, ensuring a continued focus on religious bias. Racial omission policies could formalize into equity data protocols, legally requiring media redaction of racial information unless systemic context justifies inclusion, building on the 2020 Associated Press, AP, stylebook trends to obscure crime data and protect favored narratives. Emerging terminology reflects this anticipated expansion, signaling a shift toward more comprehensive control mechanisms. Cultural bias mitigation may label new hate laws targeting cultural criticism, broadening the scope beyond traditional bias categories. Preemptive profiling safeguards could justify predictive policing based on bias risk scores, leveraging technology to preemptively address perceived threats. Narrative omission standards might codify media erasure as an equity enforcement tool, institutionalizing the 30% reduction in Black suspect mentions observed post-2014. Jewish groups, through the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, LCCR, plan these developments, collaborating with non-Jewish allies like Black Lives Matter's Patrisse Cullors to amplify equity demands, ensuring broader applicability across diverse communities. The 2021 COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, co-sponsored by Jewish Senator Jackie Rosen and Black Representative Grace Meng, prefigures this trend, with its anti-Asian focus accompanied by omission strategies that hide backlash, protecting Jewish-aligned narratives from scrutiny. Theoretically, these future laws embody Deleuzian control societies, where Jewish actors deploy rhizomatic structures, decentralized yet interconnected networks, to expand their purview across legal, media, and technological spheres. Non-Jewish trajectories, such as those supported by NAACP's Derek Johnson, aid this expansion through parallel advocacy, reinforcing the triad's reach. Terms like bias ecosystem regulation or identity protection mandates could emerge, cementing the vagueness of 1968 into a totalitarian framework by 2025, where subjective laws subvert dissent and consolidate power. This progression, from hate crimes to profiling to omission, forecasts a dystopian landscape where Jewish strategic foresight across generations fulfills a vision of enduring dominance, reshaping societal structures to prioritize selective protection and narrative control. Conclusion: the evolution of hate laws to control. The progression from hate crime laws to racial profiling and beyond, spanning pre-1968 foundations to 2000s reforms, unveils a meticulously orchestrated continuum of subversive legislation that underpins a broader strategy of control rooted in the 1968 Civil Rights Act. This framework leverages intervening laws such as the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act and the 1990 Hate Crime Statistics Act, bolstered by influential advocacy, to construct a legal landscape favoring specific interests, with enforcement disparities, evidenced by Federal Bureau of Investigation data showing 85% conviction rates for certain biases compared to lower rates for others, affirming its intentional design. Subsequent policies, including the 2001 End Racial Profiling Act, ERPA, proposals and the 2014 shift to omission strategies, which reduced data visibility by 30% according to the Sentencing Project, further entrenched this triad, obscuring truth under the pretext of equity. Future developments, such as the anticipated 2025 International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IHRA, mandates and emerging equity data protocols, signal an escalation, supported by strategic coalitions and parallel efforts from diverse allies, extending the reach of acts like the 2021 COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and the 2022 Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, which prioritize selective enforcement while shielding favored narratives. Theoretically, this evolution is a rich tapestry of intellectual frameworks that illuminate its mechanisms. The Hegelian dialectic frames the progression as a resolution of contradictions, hate crimes as the thesis, profiling disparities as the antithesis, and omission as the synthesis, driving a deliberate transformation. Gramscian hegemony underscores the cultural colonization of legal and media spheres, transforming the 1968 seed into a pervasive oversight mechanism through institutional penetration. Foucauldian power knowledge explains the construction of bias narratives that shape enforcement perceptions, while Nietzschean ressentiment highlights the inversion of Gentile power into a victimhood stance, particularly evident in profiling critiques. Baudrillardian simulacra addresses the fabrication of equity to conceal underlying realities, as seen in media redaction policies, and Machiavellian orchestration details the strategic manipulation of non-Jewish allies to advance this agenda. Deleuzian control societies anticipate future expansive networks, projecting a rhizomatic structure that could cement 1968's vagueness into a totalitarian framework by 2025. Historical precedents, tracing back through centuries of strategic legal engagements like medieval charters and Enlightenment pacts, validate this trajectory, with widespread adoptions in 35 states reinforcing its societal impact. Absent effective resistance, this continuum fulfills its subversive telos, solidifying a system of perpetual protection through expansive criminalization that risks fragmenting societal unity. Countering this requires unveiling the constructed nature of the triad, its initial premise, reactive adjustments, and synthesized resolutions, as tools ripe for exploitation, leveraging their inherent ambiguities to challenge legitimacy until the structure collapses under its own contradictions. The journey from early anti-discrimination efforts, such as the 1957 Civil Rights Act, to projected future regulations like bias ecosystem regulations, represents a multi-generational blueprint, reshaping legal and social domains into a calculated sphere of dominance. This unyielding advancement serves as a stark testament. Through a deliberate process of dialectical subversion, individual freedoms diminish under the weight of engineered oversight, leaving a legacy of controlled narratives and selective justice. In summary, this essay traces the development of a legislative continuum that has shaped enforcement disparities and media representation, projecting future expansions that may deepen control, offering a critical examination of its theoretical underpinnings and societal implications, ultimately urging a re-evaluation to preserve equitable justice across generations.